This video is going over the book Building Java Programs, Chapter 7 on arrays, and we're taking a look at the self-check number 17 called allLess through the Practice It website. So we want to write a method here, so we're going to need a public static return type. It's going to be called allLess that accepts two arrays of integers. Okay, so we know that we need an integer, and then we're going to create an array by doing that. So let's call it a1 and int a2. I always complain to my students when they don't intelligently name their arrays, but in this case the two arrays are not identified to us other than they are two different arrays. So in this case it's perfectly okay to say 1 and 2, okay? Whereas a lot of other times, if, for example, you've got rows and columns, some students will like to row 1 and row 2, and that's a bad idea because there really should be rows and columns. But in this case, they're just two different arrays. All right, so it takes two arrays of integers and returns true. So now we need to turn a Boolean. Capitalize that. Boolean. Oh no, it's not capitalized. Boolean. And it's going to be true if each element of the array is less than the element at the same index in the second array. Okay, so here's a good example. Thank you. They have two examples here and two arrays. So this should return true because at the 0 position, 45 is less than 50, 20 is less than 41, 300 is less than 600. If the arrays are not the same length, you should return false. Okay. So let's talk about pseudocode for this. So we know, first of all, let's start with the end. We know that we have to return whether the two arrays, whether the first array is less than second. Okay. So we know that we're going to need a Boolean here. So let's go ahead and declare that. So we're going to need to initialize a Boolean. Now in the middle here, we have to walk down these arrays, right? We're going to need a loop. And what's going to be in the loop? If the first element is less than the second element, it should be true. If it's not less than, we know that it's going to be false. We have to think about when are we done here? Do we want to go through every element? Let's suppose that we have a Boolean. We're gonna set it to be let's say it defaults to false. Okay, and we come in here and we say that they're less than. So we could set the Boolean to be true. Here it would be true. Here it's true. And then we could return true. But we need to be aware of what it is we are looking for. What we're looking for is whether it's all less. So as soon as we find one that's not less, we're actually out of there. We don't care what any of the other elements are, right? So what we want to do, if we set it to be false, let's say that we swap this. Okay, let me be more concrete about this. All right, so let's copy these two arrays here. I'm going to give you three choices, okay? This one we know is true, okay? So now let's try this here. That should be false, okay? And what happens here? So if we look at this first one, we're fine. We look at the second one and say, oh, it's false, okay? Then we look at the third one and we set it to be true. Then we're going to return the wrong thing in the end. So what we're seeing here is that we can't actually use a Boolean variable that we're going to set on every element of this loop, because if we do, whatever is the last one is what's going to be returned, right? Now we could add some more fancy logic saying if it's false, don't do the check. That's possible. But it's actually a lot simpler to just kick us out of this loop as soon as we find a case that it's false, okay? We don't care what this last value is, because as soon as we get here, we see that this value is greater than there, we need to return false, okay? So what we're gonna actually abandon this, and this is fine that pseudocode is wrong, okay? We're gonna abandon initting the Boolean. Instead, we're gonna change this logic to be, if we get here, we're simply gonna return true, okay? And we're gonna put that as soon as we see a false, return false, okay? And abort the rest. Okay, so now we're going to loop, and if false, return if A2 is greater than or equal to A1, return false. Okay? So let's try that. So we're going to have a loop here on the index. And now which loop do we want to use, A1 or A2? Well, they could be different lengths, right? And it says right here, if the arrays are not the same length, you should return false. So let's deal with that right now, okay? Different lengths, return false, okay? Otherwise, we're going to assume it is true, so then it doesn't matter. Okay, and here, if A2 of index greater than or equal to A1 of index, and I want to double check if each one is less than. It says less than, not less than or equal to, just less than. So if it's equal, then it should be false. Otherwise, we're going to return true. Okay, now I'm not done, but let's just run this and see what happens. Okay, so we've got a couple of cases that don't work out. And let's take a look here. So 1 is less than 4, 2 is less than 5, 3 is less than 6. We should have returned true, but we returned false. And that's because if the second one, oh, sorry, the logic is backwards. If it's less than, A2 is less than or equal to A1, then A1 is not. Yeah, I should have probably reversed that logic, but it's the same. Yeah, let's go ahead and reverse that. If A1 is greater than or equal to A2. Okay. Out of bounds, exception. Oh, index less than or equal to, sorry. It's always less than or equal to. And what's the problem here? We're doing less than or equal to. Oh yeah, because I never actually checked the different lengths. Okay, so I've got to put that check in here. So if A1.length doesn't equal A2.length, return false. Okay, now what's the problem? 0. Okay, so the length is 3. So it's going to go 0, 1, 2. How do we get 3? Oh, it should be less than. Ah, there we go. So now we've got all those tests passing. Now I want to revisit this the idea of a for each loop. So we could go in here and we could replace for each. But if you remember my discussion in problem 16a, I mentioned that the only reason why for each doesn't work well is because if you need the index, okay, how are you going to do this problem here, comparing these two values without the index? You can't. The only way to do it is using the index. So in this case, this is an excellent example of why you cannot use a for each loop. Okay. All right, so what did we learn in this? This is a bit of a different problem that we've seen before. Okay, so we've got two arrays. That's the first time we're dealing with two different arrays, and we've got this interesting algorithm. It's not a cumulative. It's not a min-max. It's definitely a beast all of its own. Okay, where we have to go in and we have to compare one element from each of these arrays. And then we have to exit out of the loop early, or we have to do some rather convoluted logic here to prevent this check from being done and setting a Boolean. So it's quite a bit of a different problem, but hopefully you understood how I was working through the problem, and I showed you that maybe your pseudocode isn't always going to be right, but as you work through it, you can figure it out. But at least it keeps you on the right path moving forward. Okay, so if you liked and found this helpful, please like and subscribe. I have a complete curriculum on building Java programs, and I do a lot of these practice it programs for you.